I think what's important for us with this convening of people, Penelope, you asked a very salient point as ever, what do we hope to get out of this? And I do think one of the crucial things for us, obviously next year is our 10th anniversary at the Hepworth. There's going to be one of the larger Barbara Hepworth shows that's been mounted in the country that's going to be sort of the central focus of that year for, how many months are we doing it for, Eleanor? Can you? Oh, only 3, oh, right, okay. I always imagine it's going to be longer, but during that summer period, there is still room for the thinking and ideas that come from the couple of days here to feed into the development of that show. It's not absolutely, I hope you're not giving me daggers, I'm sure it's not done and dusted. So, as conversations unfold here, that will be incredibly useful for us. But I think above and beyond that, the fact that Hepworth is a constant presence in the gallery through our collection displays, to really be making sure that, we are talking to a wider group of people that have this fascination and inspiration from Barbara's work, and to constantly be finding ways to reinterpret, reframe, bring out things that perhaps haven't been investigated or thought about before in her work. And if I'm being absolutely honest, we need help in doing that. I mean, we are lucky to have curatorial expertise in Hepworth here, but we're also thinking about so many other things too, and I think it's great to have a moment to pause and think in more depth about somebody that is so central to our work here, and obviously, to everybody's work and interests in this room too, and to be able to share these ideas, these experiences. And also, I suppose on my mind is thinking about how we introduce new audiences to get the experiences we've all enjoyed with Barbara's work, how we keep refreshing that and making the vitality of her work continue to resonate through these hugely changing times. And probably I'd say on one level we've never needed her work more. There is something that can slow you down and, for me, ground you and get you back to some experiences that, in my somewhat, on occasion, neurotic way of having to deal with things when viruses or whatever are thrown at you, I'm deeply grateful for. And I think audiences respond to so well here. One of the reasons we do continue to get such large visitor numbers, 230, 240,000 on the outskirts of Wakefield, I think in great part is testament to the power of Hepworth's ongoing appeal and relevance for people. So yeah, brilliant moment, I think, hopefully to explore our mutual expertise and passion, and all of us to think through how we can be allies for one another and how that might manifest in either the academic work that's being done, in publications that we want to produce, for the artists in the room in terms of your own work, how it might inflect on that, our collection displays, how we build a collection moving forward. But I think there are so many avenues to explore and think through. So thank you all for coming.
I'd like to join Simon in thanking you for making the trip. And it's so lovely, such a treat to see so many Hepworth specialists in one place. As Simon was saying, part of the reason for doing this and part of the reason for starting the Hepworth Research Network is to provide a catalyst for further Hepworth research. And it was really great to have your many enthusiastic responses to the invitation, particularly revealing a broad range of potential avenues for further Hepworth research. So over the next few days, we'll see lots of different subjects covered, thinking about Hepworth and her work, how it's interpreted, cared for, and displayed. The afternoon starts with talks by some of those who've been key in instigating the Hepworth Research Network. So we're going to start with an introduction to the network and its aims by Professor Michael White, Head of Department and Professor of History of Art at the University of York. Many of you know Michael from his work in 20th century modernism and also his role in the Sculpture Studies Research Group at the University of York. And it's through conversations on this area that we really started thinking about building a research network around Hepworth to bring together material or technical art history with traditional art history and curatorial practices, and what those sort of conversations might produce. Michael and I were then really delighted to be joined in this aim by the University of Huddersfield, who opened the new Barbara Hepworth building last year to house their School of Art, Design and Architecture. And the interdisciplinary approach exemplified in this building we discussed with Dr. Annika Pettican, who's acting head of Department in Art and Communications, and she'll be talking a bit after Michael about the role of artistic practice within the network, and particularly her role as part of Brass Art Collective. Then we'll move on to our keynote, Laura Davies. Laura, who again many of you know, is a senior sculpture conservator who works with the sculpture collections of Tate and the Arts Council, among others, and who's been the principal sculpture conservator for the Hepworth collection here in Wakefield since we opened in 2011. And Laura will discuss several case studies from her practice where this dialogue between the archive, art historical research, material practice and curatorial questions have been enlightening, and perhaps new past knowledge have been forged through collaborative and interdisciplinary thinking. So after this we'll have tea, which is obviously very important, and then the rest of the event comprises these series of panels in which most of you are participating, and this has sort of been designed to further this idea of cross-disciplinary conversation. So these short 10-minute papers have been grouped together in loose themes to bring artists, art historians, conservators and curators onto the same platform in the hope that ideas will spark and collide in a productive fashion. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Michael to tell us a bit more.
So, just I was thinking for the last days quite how to do an introduction here. This probably is one of the more terrifying things that I've done, to stand and introduce the Hepworth Research Network in front of so many experts in this particular field. I'm going to start actually by just saying a big thank you and making an apology. So the big thank you is to Eleanor, who really has driven this and has been the energy behind all of this, really. She actually, I did a quick check, and it was actually the 10th of January 2017 that you first mentioned this to me when we started our conversation. In the meantime, I've had 2 children, and really has put up with my prevarications and busyness with other things in actually getting a lot of this moving. So many apologies to Eleanor for all of that, but it's absolutely fantastic that we're here together now. So in terms of talking a bit about the network and what its aspirations might be, I thought I'd also do this through another kind of thing that's been happening over the last few years, which is how relevant this is actually for the University of York in relation to an object in our collection, which is what you see here, single form antiphon, 1969. You see it in its previous location just outside the Jack Lyons Concert Hall on the University of York campus. So actually, looking back through my old emails around the Hepworth Research Network, was a whole series of other emails which about our concerns about this particular artwork. And I thought to tell you a little bit about the history of its arrival at the University of York and our deliberations since, because I think that actually they feed directly into some of the things that we might be doing over the next a couple of days. So the story about how this gets to the University of York, I won't go through the full details, but the connection really is to do with Margaret Reed, Ludo Reed, and then widow of Sir Herbert Reed, who was made an honorary doctorate of the University of York in the 1960s, and she had contacts with the music department, and then facilitated the acquisition of this particular sculpture, which was acquired by the university for just its casting costs. Those are the only costs that Barbara Hepworth asked for. So it's a wonderful thing to have, essentially a gift of some kind. The casting costs were paid by Sir William Crossthwaite, who's the mayor of Middlesbrough. That's a sort of connection that I'm yet to kind of fully work out. He must have had a connection with the University of York in its early days. Then, so arrived in 1970 and was installed next to the Jack Lyons Concert Hall, adjacent to the music department, because of that connection to music, both in the title of the work and its route into the campus. It then moved briefly in 2003 and was exhibited at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park as part of the Barbara Hepworth Centenary exhibition of that year. So we see it there. I've got another one, view of it from the side, where it received a small amount of conservation and then returned subsequently to York after that, and actually moved about 2 metres from where it had been before. I don't know quite exactly why the well, that particular bush location was deemed to be the most appropriate, but it's a kind of indicative of the sort of lack of curatorial skills generally in the University of York, which are kind of ongoing, I must say. Then, say, just about the time that Alan and I started our conversation, it became subject to kind of attention that it had not had for a great many years. It had been quietly situated in a very kind of modest position for some 40 odd years. But I had raised some concerns about it, tried to alert the university to its value, both financial value and cultural value, and that's something we should be alert and concerned about. Certainly when the university went through a process of discussing the value of certain items with its insurer, this was certainly seen to be a potential risk to have sculpture in its current location. So Antiphon went on a holiday. Basically, this was very, very interesting for me. It's not something I see happen every day. It was a team from the Yorkshire Sculpture Park coming and de-installing it. So it was 2 guys and a truck and a hook there, you can see, and they did it incredibly carefully, and with great care and attention. It took them no more than half an hour, basically, to get it off its concrete plinth and in the back of a lorry, and off they went. It just made me think about someone who wasn't paying so much care and attention, how quickly they might have done that particular job. So it received some conservation from Laura, I believe, actually, and then came here for a period of time, where its first appearance was in the Disobedient Bodies, J.W. Anderson, get the title of that, curates the Hepworth Wakefield show from March to June 2017. And it was really remarkable to kind of see it in its new context, in a gallery display, first having been outside for all of that time before, in relation to some really kind of extraordinary other objects, in a show actually about some really interesting materials and material practices, fabrics and textiles and clothing, which really, it must look like a completely different sculpture in many ways. We can talk about this much later. Obviously it has changed its patternation quite dramatically, from that green to this rich brown. It was due to return to the University of York shortly after that, and this is a slightly comical image. So we don't have anyone in the university whose task it really is to curate the collection. That's something that's being resolved right now, and actually for people in the room might be, if you know people, very shortly I believe that a job advert will be going out for a 0.5 curatorial position to ensure that actually we can look after our collection properly. Anyway, this was the result of myself and the head of estates roaming the entire campus thinking about a place actually we could put this in sculpture. None of the buildings on the University of York have been made for the display of art, and especially not such a fine piece of sculpture as this. And rather remarkably, having really done a massive tour of every possible building we could think of, we ended up almost back to where we started. And this is us actually just experimenting, as you see, with some cardboard tubes. to find out actually whether it would fit, because one of the things we discovered is just simply things to do with ceiling heights. Just really was struggling to find somewhere that we could just fit the sculpture in. But it was a really instructive exercise, because it discovered in the process that we couldn't get really accurate information about actually the size of the sculpture. We had material from our own records, and then we had, comparing that with other casts in other collections, all seemed to actually say it was a slightly different height. And I couldn't work out quite why that should be. That's a question. That's a big open question for all of you in the room later. What point it was being measured from. And it was a big concern, because you can see that from the top of that cardboard tube, we only had about 20 centimetres to play with, and thinking about someone coming in with this on a pallet and how they might get it on and off was a bit of a concern. Anyway, it was a success in the end. Well, success to the extent we got it into the space. So another reason for putting it there was that it had some friends. We see on your right there a bust of Vaughan Williams by Jacob Epstein, and on the left David Wynne bust of Thomas Beecham. So I actually had some sculpture to keep it company in this space. So then in the end of I think it's your date it came back. So the end of 2018, it returned to campus and went into this particular space. And this is a photograph I took of it just yesterday. So this is a very current installation view. It's in a space that is known as the Rosalind Lyons Gallery, but actually it's a kind of corridor between the Jack Lyons Concert Hall and the Music Research Centre that has some other kind of works of art in it. So there's sculptures that I mentioned. Actually some bits of pottery now that are some things actually being produced on campus in our pottery studio on campus, which I can talk about later. And there it is. And it's actually a mere 30 metres away from actually where it started, and this spot in the bushes, just through the windows up there. Now I thought I'd tell that story because it's involved quite a lot of kind of interesting things for me. A sculpture that I'm relatively familiar with, having walked past very frequently on my way to my office, familiarity with it being there, looking the way it did. Now to see it actually extremely different in appearance, now to consider actually where we might move it from outside to inside, now actually having seen it to some extent demystified as an object, actually just sort of witnessed it actually as a lump of metal to be moved, raised loads and loads of questions for me actually about its material properties. And that's really where a lot of the thinking around this particular network is hopefully going to find some of its energy and focus around questions of materials, materiality. And it's this really, through this process, say that also a conversation I started with Eleanor really productively opened up through contact with Annika and the Centre for Sculptural Thinking at the University of Huddersfield. Barbara Hepworth offers an incredibly exceptional resource, it seems to me. The collections, the archives, the library, material here and at Tate, surviving physical studio space, tools, and its extraordinary array of materials for considering a particular material practice, an opportunity to consider sculpture and sculptural practices in the widest sense. Also through the lens of materiality, really to kind of open up in an interdisciplinary way and think about, say, the relationship to conservation, to curation, and to practice. I think this is going to be incredibly productive and exciting. This is very nice to see, just has been recently digitised actually on the Tate website. There we go. 7 past there, and the University of York already listed as the first recipient. Now, so what do we mean by materiality? That's something for us to think through over the next day and a half and beyond, I very much hope, and say to combine the kind of collective expertise here to understand Hepworth's engagement with materials, the combination of chemistry and artistry. That might involve thinking about weight and measure and viewpoint and surface, but it also is about how they connect to, for me, to other values and ideas. So materiality is our understanding of the relationship between the material and the immaterial. So this is not a kind of materialism. This is all not just reducing it to just stuff, but actually thinking about how we get from the stuff to the ideas. You might think about that actually, what the hell is he talking about? How we might conceive the difference between something like cultural property and cultural heritage. It's not all about a kind of physical thing. It's about a set of ideas that can be handed down and collectively shared. Now, this is just very interesting to think about material and immaterial, and how the notion of materiality is something that works between them. So this is single form antiphon in its 1953 Boxwood version at the Ashmolean. This I found really fascinating. This is a recent post by the Ashmolean on their Facebook site, which has posted a detail of it. That section there, actually where you can see some rather kind of large cracking in the wood. So something that's taking us somehow closer to the material in the sense of its woodenness, and its changing nature as a material, that actually it is physically changing. It's not stopped in time. It's continuing to have a life as an object, but it's being communicated now through something digital, something highly immaterial. I thought it's just really interesting to think about kind of the virtualization of this sculpture and kind of, say, the extended life it's having and the different audiences that it's reaching. For me, I've just been together with Annika and Eleanor putting together an AHRC Research Network grant application that will hopefully fund more of this activity. We're awaiting its outcome. And for that, to write about the beneficiaries of such research. I see myself, to some extent, as a beneficiary, as someone who has an interest in a Barbara Hepworth sculpture, as a custodian of it, actually to find out a lot more about it, and actually to understand it far more deeply than I do currently. So I've been looking around at other casts of single form antiphon, and really struck actually by their differences, particularly in patternation. So this is 2 others, one in Mount Holyoke College Museum and the other in Milwaukee. And thinking about how our close attention to Hepworth's very kind of idiosyncratic and close attention and thoughts about materials and their uses can really help me as an art historian make certain kind of moves from conventional practices of interpretation to those around presentation, around experience, and around encounter that will hopefully, say, really kind of broaden my horizons. We might also just think that certain kind of immaterial qualities of Hepworth are not necessary to be totally discounted. The increasing financial value, actually, of this sculpture has led to its transformation in the kind of the York version. If it hadn't have become so valuable, it wouldn't have gone on the particular journey that it has. It wouldn't have changed its appearance in the way that it has. I was going to show you this extraordinary little visualization that Christie's put on. I'll see if I can get this to work. Maybe it won't. Oh, there we go. Again, just thinking about the different ways in which you can experience a Hepworth sculpture these days. See if this is going to do it. If it doesn't, if you look at that particular part of the website, you will see a 3D virtual visualization of it where the sculpture actually spins. Let's leave that. It'll do its thing. Also, just very interested in what differences there might be between the different casts. Just really, really simple things. I'm not sure that the University of York cast of Antiphon has this Morris Singer Foundry London on it. I've not seen it, but maybe I've not looked hard enough. And I've also got a question that's just, ooh, it's doing its thing now. It's doing its thing. I'll shut that down. Now you're all intrigued, aren't you? Let's see if it actually does it. Let's see if the technology works. Because it is quite interesting when it does. I'll give it 10 more seconds and then I'll close it. There we go. Is that worth waiting for? It excited me. Yeah. So I've actually got one question for the combined expertise in this room, and it might be a question you'd probably just tell me, Michael. It's very obvious why this and this, you know, and it all can be solved in a sentence. But why is it that in the different casts of single form Antiphon, the sculpture is either on one side or the other of this base? It's not consistent throughout the 7 versions, and I have no idea why. It's something I've only just noticed recently by looking at its different presentations, and I'm really intrigued now. Really intrigued about the choices that have been made at various stages in the production of this object and the consequences for their future life. So that's a kind of sketch of my kind of interest here. I'm really excited at what's going to emerge out of these various conversations. I think there's enormous potential in this room, as much as people might actually know each other reasonably well already. I think hopefully we're going to venture into some new areas and generate some new thoughts on Hepworth. So that's basically all I have to say to get us going. And I'm going to hand over to Annika now.
So I've got this thing at the moment where I'm between glasses and not glasses, so do bear with me. So if I want to look at you all, I have to do this, and if I want to read, I need to do that. So I want to, first of all, thank Eleanor and Michael for introducing the broader network and also inviting me to participate. So I was initially introduced to the Barbara Hepworth Network through my PhD supervisor, Dr. Alison Rowley, as a result of my long-term artistic practice with the collective brass art and her interest in the ways we have visibly and invisibly brought our material practice into a relationship with a number of well-known archives and collections. These opportunities have ranged from highly speculative sojourns to very deliberate encounters that last anything from a day to almost a year in their both planning and execution. Before I continue, I should explain that I am 1/3 of the collective brass art, alongside my collaborators Cara Lewis and Kristen Mojsiewicz, who are both here today. They're at the back. Brass Art was founded in 1999 at the Palace Hotel in Manchester, in the run-up to an event that occupied this well-known landmark for a one-night-only exhibition of performative encounters titled Our Night at the Palace. The event coincided with the International Symposium of Electronic Art, a network we have intermittently collaborated and contributed with for over maybe 16 years, most recently in the exhibition Revolution in Hong Kong in 2016. Being three is an important factor in our practice. It operates like an invisible thread that pulls us constantly into an evolving dynamic configuration. Over time, we have developed a personal methodology for reflecting upon sculptural thinking and making. In the context of the Barbara Hepworth Network, it seems pertinent to show 4 examples of the ways in which brass art have engaged in key themes that I believe are important to the success of the Barbara Hepworth Network. I'm going to be brief. So, the first thing I'd like to talk about is material engagement and the archive. So, our most recent engagement with a collection saw us working with the Grundy Art Gallery in Blackpool and its partner museums to make Still Life No. 3, a shadow plate installation. We created the first iteration of Still Life No. 1 for the Whitworth in 2012 for the exhibition Dark Matters. Working with Manchester Museum, we were drawn to the overlooked, the unseen, and the items without provenance. For the new work, we took inspiration from Blackpool's famous landmarks and considered its complex histories and its ambivalent relationship to the sea. The exhibition, titled A Trick of the Light, was designed to coincide with the famous illuminations, and brass art was selected because of our long-term engagement with light as a material. For this project, we not only scanned a famous model of the tower, which seemed ultimately really important to the project, but in fact we didn't use it for a number of reasons. But we also visited the home of the Illuminations, an enormous warehouse on the edge of town, a most uncanny interior playground. The final installation juxtaposed hand-modelled objects, 3D printed objects, 9 miniature sculptures taken from performative 3D body scans of the artists, a table, a revolving light, recycled paper and cellophane. So, second point, curatorial strategy as encounter. For this project, we were selected by Arts and Heritage through a competitive process for the Meeting Point 2 Commission at Chetham's Library, famous for visiting readers such as Karl Marx and Frederick Engels. We worked closely with the Chief Librarian, Michael Power, and also the Heritage Manager, Sue McLaughlin, to create a body of work that was installed throughout the 15th century medieval building. The exhibition Gestured presented the first application of sculptural thinking to John Dee's original hand-drawn manicures. Dee, 1527 to 1609, was resident warden, alchemist, polymath, and advisor to Elizabeth I. Some say he was Shakespeare's inspiration for the character Prospero in The Tempest. Our curatorial strategy was to capture our own gestures that would point to, clasp, hold, and reach towards less prominent narratives contained within the archive. The installation and the exhibition Gestured comprised a series of installed blown glass, cast and 3D printed sculptural pieces, a visual catalogue, a single collection of channel video pieces that we sort of manipulated, and a series of public events. These included performances involving leading thereminists Lydia Kavina and actors guiding our audience through the various rooms and corridors, some of which were generally hidden to the public, during a torchlit tour at night. Okay, so collaborative events. So as artists, we obviously organise many things. So the conference Folds in Time was convened by Brass Art to coincide with the museum, Freud Museum's Festival of the Unconscious. It brought together artists, curators, theorists, writers, and cultural historians to examine ways that artists harness aspects of the uncanny and the unconscious in their navigation of both physical and imagined spaces. Built around artists' material practices, which have responded to the repressed, the unthought, or the untold, and which employ fractured, dreamlike, or metamorphic narratives, the conference mixed keynote addresses by Dr. Alison Rowley and Professor Patricia Alma with artist presentations and artists in conversations. Those presenting included Rachel Anderson, formerly of Art Angel and now of Idle Women, ourselves, Brass Art, Rebecca Fortnam at the Royal College of Art, Pavel Peace, currently curator of visual art at the Walker in Minneapolis, Lindsay Sears, artist, Daniel Silva, artist, Saskia Older-Volbers, artist, and Rachel Withers, writer. So again, this is an example of how we like to sort of work with experts in their field and other participants and just generally bring people together. And I think that's the role I hope I can sort of play in this network, bringing artists into learning about. So I think everything we do encourages us to learn and engage with experts. So for us, this is a really beautiful opportunity to sort of really learn more about Barbara Hepworth. So currently, I'm working at the School of Art Design and Architecture, and we've moved into the Barbara Hepworth building. And the intent of this building is to bring the three departments together to operate as a school of transdisciplinary practice. Sophie came and opened the building for us, which was a real pleasure. And we've been working in this space since September. So for us, I think inviting you to our building, hopefully the HRC that Michael has led on and Eleanor comes off, will be a real pleasure. But currently, one of the things Brass Art do is we work very transdisciplinary. We work with all sorts of people. So I thought just to introduce this very briefly, which is our current project. So at the moment, Wolf's Writing Room is the third space in the trilogy Shadow Worlds Writers' Rooms. It's a body of work Brass Art have been developing since 2015. We use Xbox Connect sensors to capture our movements in the homes of our chosen writers. And basically, we've made a series of films using video from the cloud data that comes from that process. So it's quite the virtual world that Michael alludes to in a sense. Our writers were the Brontes, Sigmund Freud and Virginia Woolf. And together, I suppose they collectively lived between 1816 and 1941. Obviously, there's not time to discuss this project in any length, but it does introduce what I see as key aspects of transdisciplinary practice that I hope will be vital to the work and hopefully the evolution of the Barbara Hepworth Network. So in 2018, December, we visited Robmell, the home of Virginia Woolf, and this is actually her writing room, her shed, which has been extended. So her writing room is the part on the left of the tree. And the part on the right has been extended as a curatorial peephole into her world. So there's this kind of divided space. From our research, we've discovered that Virginia Woolf actually triangulates the writers we've been investigating, our trilogy. Woolf's first piece of published writing was a review of the Bronte parsonage in Haworth, and she famously visited Freud in his home in Maresfield Gardens, London, just before he died, actually. And indeed, during this visit, he presented her with a Narcissus, which I've always thought was a very lovely idea. So our project with Woolf is basically in its inception stage. However, we have already begun a loose collaboration with a transdisciplinary team, which includes architects, scanners, programmers, as well as the National Trust. And we hope to translate aspects of our initial research into cloud data that can be harnessed in the production of video, photographic, and virtual reality artifacts as a sort of material practice. So, finally, my role as an artist and educator, I see it as to broaden the network's connections in the fields of art practice and contemporary curatorial practice through hopefully chairing the event at the Barbara Hepworth Building with the Sculptural Thinking Group at the University of Huddersfield, and to support both Michael and Eleanor in the development of the network. So thank you.
Thanks very much for inviting me. I think it's been a case of me being in the right place at the right time, really, and getting to really get my hands on lots of Hepworths over the last 11 years. And I'm hoping today to share with you some of my observations as a practitioner, really. My comfort zone really is right up on a ladder rather than presenting and talking in front of people, so bear with me. Also, I quite like the ladder. It features quite a lot in the talk, I have to say. There are quite a lot of them. It's a bit of an analogy, really, of how you approach your learning curve with Hepworths. Use different sources. We have our historical sources, we have the archive, we have scientific analysis. Sometimes that gives you 2 steps up and then you come down a few rungs when you're trying to put this into practice, because conservation really is an act of trial and error in lots of ways. And I'm either harnessed on, or I'm hemmed in and built into something, or I've got a mask on, and that's quite helpful because then you can't talk to people. If they ask you questions, you just do things. And actually, I think I've been asked to talk today because of my Hepworth mileage, and this is measured in the square inch per scrubbing with a toothbrush. And I've got a couple of rivals here, maybe in the audience, for my Hepworth mileage. And the best toothbrushes are the ones that your children have used, and they've been a bit worn down, and then they're small, you can get into crevices. Also, lots of shots of power tools. I often get help with my practice also. If it's a big project, we get other people involved. I think Tessa's over there. And that's really the beginning of this collaborative approach to research, where you bring in other people and you share your knowledge. This was a particular project that we completed on behalf of Tate a few years ago to restore Foursquare Walkthrough in St Ives in the Garden. And it really is a culmination of lots of skill, knowledge and practice all put together. And this is a detail of the surface of Foursquare Walkthrough. There are a few different areas of patternation. Some are green and some are brown. But this is really to illustrate how corroded and porous and affected the surface has been through weathering over time. And once cleaned and all the old wax is removed and the corrosion is addressed and the bird poo is removed and the chewing gum scraped off, and you apply wax, you really get to actually see the surface of a Hepworth. I think as a conservator, we climb up and down, we get inside and out, we really get to know the sculptures. We literally see them from the top and the bottom and the insides. A really lovely moment on this particular work was where we revealed these beautiful little details from Hepworth's carving hammers. So she would make the initial sculptures in plaster, and then she would carve them, and she would use sandpaper. She'd use everything at her disposal to shape the surfaces. She'd pour plaster on. You can see drips of plaster where they've become frozen once they're cast in bronze. But we were able at this point to pop over to the studio adjacent to the sculpture and find this particular tool which corresponds to the actual marks, and that was quite a good, rewarding moment for me. This is just to illustrate how the wire armature is the beginning of a sculpture, which is then progressed into some plaster, and then from that we get a bronze. And this particular plaster cast of hollow form within a form can be seen in the galleries at the moment, and I think it really does illustrate the difference in contrasts of textures which she would achieve with the plaster modelling. I'm starting with my wall of shame now. So this is one of the worst, most deteriorated sculptures I've ever come across. It belongs to Leeds Art Gallery. It doesn't look like this anymore, thankfully. It's partly in this state because it was displayed on top of a rooftop gallery right above a dual carriageway in Leeds, and it's possibly one of the most polluted places in the north of England. And you can see the sculpture's developed a really ugly black crust across its whole surface, and there's no contrast left anymore in that sculpture. This is an image of dual form from the Leeds Art Gallery catalogue as it entered the museum, and I hopefully you can see the difference in the qualities of the sculpture. These are some really horrible close-ups of the porosity that the sculpture's developed and the lines of the watermarks as they run down the surface. And these are steel casting pin holes or remnants that the bronze casters would fill with steel to repair the sculptures. They often corrode really badly, and then they burst through the surface of the bronze and cause this kind of staining. And again, this is perhaps a good point to talk a little bit about corrosion and patination and the difference between weathering and an applied patiner. So this sculpture here is where the original patiner and where Hepworth would really have wanted a dark brown exterior and a light green interior has become really obscured by an acquired patiner as it's weathered over time. If we look at the surface of Foursquare Walkthrough before it was conserved, we can see this natural patiner as the original one has changed over time. As it's been exposed to atmospheric pollutants, it develops this very green, traditional verdigris kind of coloration. I've chosen this image of spring to talk a bit about applied patination because this is the Hepworth Estates cast, which I think is on show upstairs. This particular sculpture has never been shown outside, so it exists in its completely original state. And we can see here the really dark brown patina on the exterior and the green on the interior. An applied patina has been a process used since antiquity to decorate the surface of sculpture. Now, the solutions, the chemicals, the products they use are almost identical to actual natural weathering. It's just that it's done on purpose rather than done over time and over decades. And there have been really detailed scientific studies which show that these compounds which develop are almost exactly the same, so it's really hard to distinguish between them sometimes. And this brings me to a question that I'd quite like to pose today about how sculptures change and how we should address this, or whether we should or not even. This is ascending form in its original location, which was outside the front of the gallery, and now it's been moved to the new Hepworth Garden. And it sits really near to a really beautiful Rebecca Warren sculpture, which is lovely and white. And we have really good evidence to suggest that the surface of ascending form should also be white and luminous, rather than the kind of khaki grey that it's become, that you can see in the photograph on the left, which is from the Hepworth Archive, the sculpture in the garden in 1960. If a string breaks or needs replacing, we would instantly replace it. It's integral to the sculpture. And this, I think, is interesting in terms of patination and colour, which we have difficulty in interpreting or deciding what to do with. This is the Arts Council Collection's version of Spring, and it had been the strings had been replaced with white strings a long time ago, and so I was commissioned by them to restring it. And I might play it again. This particular brown linen twine, cotton linen twine, was found in a warehouse in Liverpool in Kent & Co. They had previously been selling the white string. I happened to chat with the chap on the phone explaining what I was doing. He said, "Oh, we've got lots of that old brown red string in the cupboard somewhere. It's not been used since the 60s when we'd send it down to St Ives." So that's a lovely little link there. I think Derek has written about the original strings, which were thought to be associated with the fishing industry in St Ives. And they were dyed using seaweed and different natural dye stuffs to become, I think it's called Derek, what's it called? I've forgotten. Barking, like a dog. But it would make that particular dark red colouring. Here's another lovely photo of ascending form Gloria. Let's flip through. That was provided to me by the Hepworth Estate, and this was photographed somewhere between 1976 and 96. It still retains this very opaque white coloration. As conservators, we are very concerned with preserving the originality of a sculpture and the original surface. And this becomes very difficult when we really want to address some really radical change with the sculpture. For instance, this is hollow form within a form, and it's the first piece I restored for the Hepworth Wakefield. And in this instance, really, I just preserved what was there in the actual sculpture by enhancing the patina. And we can see how the application of wax with a hot blowtorch has really just saturated the original patina, and we've provided some insight into how it should look. So it's got the lovely contrasty green inside, which is very textured, and the exterior very brown, shiny surface. And this really is just preservation, in my view. We've not intervened much at all. We've just kept what's there. And this becomes far more difficult when a sculpture is so weathered and so disfigured and so non-representative of an artist's intent anymore. So that's dual form on the left in its weathered state, and then dual form on the right when it's been moved to Leeds University campus and underwent some quite interventive conservation, where I did actually replace the green patina on the surface, which felt essential in this instance. I'm going to go back to ascending form now, because this is one of the first commissions I undertook for the Arts Council collection. This version is situated up in Northumberland in Alnwick Gardens. And this is another version which I went to assess. It's in Longstone Cemetery in Carbis Bay, St Ives. And then, of course, we have our ascending form, which is situated at the front of the gallery. Just back to this one, actually. I was on site at Alnwick Gardens, and I was up a ladder again, and I was trying to conserve this work in 2 days or 3 days, whatever time I had. And I discovered this white residue on the surface, which I really couldn't explain. Actually, to be honest, I was up a ladder removing a huge wasp's nest, which had become embedded in the sculpture, and there were holes in the sculpture, and the wasps were in and out. And I was trying to deal with that, getting very confused because the wasp's nest material looked quite like the white residues, and it was a real mystery. I'd got 2 kids on tow also. They'd both got chicken pox. They're both under 5 and being looked after by grandparents, so it felt like everything was against me. But I knew enough to get in contact with the Hepworth estate and try and figure out what this residue was and how important and how integral it was to the sculpture. And thankfully, Sophie Bowness is just at the end of a phone call, and she's often there, I have to say. I imagine this red telephone in her office which lights up when there's a Hepworth in trouble. She's always full of information and so easy to approach and so helpful. I was really glad on that day because it was against all the odds, and it could have just all got removed. I'm being really honest now. Thankfully, we just preserved what was there, and then this started a whole investigation for myself personally into learning more about Hepworth's techniques and her processes and looking at archive material. So this is ascending form again, and it's a photograph from inside the Trowan studio in January 1959. I was really lucky to be able to spend some time in the archive at Tate Britain looking at the letters from Hepworth, in particular looking for references to patternation. And in one particular letter, the foundry is in contact with her secretary, and they're discussing the use of a milk white for ascending form. And they also recommend that the sculpture can be collected when it's dry. That really, to me, suggested that this was far more than this wasn't our traditional patina, which was a chemical application. These generally dry instantaneously. And this is the first indication that this would be a paint layer, possibly. Another photograph, I'm just really going to keep showing you photographs of it looking white to get this message across. It just looks so opaque and so matte. And in another letter, Hepworth refers to the repatination of this bronze. So she's in correspondence again with her foundry, who say, "We have successfully completed the repatination of your bronze ascending form. Mr. Fresner and Mr. Hayter, who did the work last week, say that it now looks as well as our latest cast. They are no longer surprised that the city-living Japanese have to wear masks. The bronze had an atmospheric crust all over it." So these had been to Japan. They'd come back completely unrepresentative of what Hepworth wanted, and she repatinated them, which is a really, for me, a great insight into her thinking and how she would have addressed this. This is my favourite letter because she comments, it's lovely to be able to read her letters and start to understand her tone and her interest and her attention to detail, and that comes through when you get to spend time with this material. And she's referring again to the exhibits in Tokyo, and she says, the bronze has only been twice in 2 sculpture parks. The atmosphere must be incredibly polluted, and I shudder to think what the big bronze they brought for me is like. I don't know which that big bronze is. Sophie, would you know? Okay. But again, I liked to hear that tone, which you can tell in the letters, where she really cares what they look like, and will take steps to address that even in her own lifetime. We had some scientific analysis done by X-ray diffraction on the white residues, and this analysis revealed that it contained calcite, rutilite and dolomite. This was performed at Imperial College by Richard Sweeney, and he could confirm from this analysis that this really is consistent with 1960s and 70s household paint preparations of the time. It'd be really lovely to be able to get further analysis done using FTIR, which will examine the organic components of the remnants also. Oh, I can't see that. Also, Sophie Bowness recently sent me a lovely correspondence between a collector in America regarding the treatment of her sculpture, Patmos, which is a similar white-coloured sculpture. And Hepworth advises on how she should treat this. She says, I'm very sorry to hear that the atmosphere where you live has an ill effect on Patmos. My own copy in the garden is, of course, entirely immaculate because I have ideal clean air and no diesel fumes. I think the patina was obtained by milk and lime, which may be vulnerable to a polluted atmosphere. And I would suggest that you brushed it with a very small suede brush, and that then you get help from a good craftsman to paint it all over with a white atmosphere-resistant paint. And immediately before it sets, rub all the surfaces clean, leaving only the white crustaceans in the hollow. This, I think, would be impervious to pollution. It would not be difficult, providing an intelligent man rubbed off the surfaces, leaving only white in the crevices. She goes on to say, interestingly, the alternative would be to let it take its course in your atmosphere. By washing it and waxing it, it would then, no doubt, take on new colour and a pattern of all of its own. So here we can hear two voices and two attitudes to the sculptures, whether they change or not. She seemed to be accepting of both. In regards to her colour and patination and use of paint surfaces, we can see on 2 figures here the blue areas and the green areas, obviously quite thick, opaque paint applications. The one from the family of man, and it's from 1970s. Just check what I'm talking about here. Ah, yes. And here I wanted to refer to the polished edges on the sculptures, which are basically exposed areas of bronze, which must have been lacquered, I would say, to preserve those areas. And we can see that on the 4-square walkthrough, which we restored a few years ago. And this is where I need notes. Tate Gallery, Conservation Department, the Science Conservation Department did analyse some of these lacquers to reveal that they contained yellow ochre pigments. So Hepworth herself would colour her own lacquers. And there's a really excellent body of work called From Marble to Chocolate, which I'd recommend anybody to read, where Derek Pullen and Sandra Dayton, they did an inventory of the Hepworth studio and found lots of paints with Dulux and Magicoat and lots of colours. And they also found dried up jam jars with different lacquers, and that's what was analysed. So these are another really rich area of resource. I think Melanie's going to talk about a more recent inventory of the studio also. I wanted to talk a little bit how colour is very subjective. This is my daughter's sketch of 4-square walkthrough. She's in the corner there, which is the very first time I examined it. I think she was 6. And I love the way she talked about the light on the sculpture. And then I'm diverting here, but I just wanted to include this quote from Hepworth, which says, "Perhaps what one wants to say is formed in childhood, and the rest of one's life is spent trying to say it," which is, I just think, really revelatory, really lovely. And I think this whole interpretation of colour is incredibly subjective. Even Hepworth herself writes about how it was more of a transient feeling on an emotion rather than an actual colour. She writes, "I've been very influenced by the natural colour and luminosity in stones and woods, the change in colour as light travels over the surface and contour. When I pierced the material right through, a great change seemed to take place in the concavities from which the direct light was excluded. From this experience, my use of colour developed." One more, it's the last drawing, but it's my daughter's drawing of river form, where she really did capture the light on the sculpture, the water it collected, the sunlight, the rainbows, the things she was talking about, I thought was just really quite special. And then on the right is river form, again from one of the Marlborough Fine Art catalogues. Here I wanted to talk about how saturated the colours are in these particular publications. And they were, in the 60s and 70s, these photographs would have been taken on C-type film, slide film. And once they're reproduced in catalogues of this era, it's called Cibachrome or Kodachrome printing, they become this incredibly oversaturated and slightly unrealistic colour. And I thought this was a great illustration of Barbara Hepworth's red trousers and the contrast with her top. And it just shows this hyperreal kind of colour, which we can't be that trustworthy, we can't really take for granted. If you think of John Hind photography at the postcard photography at the time, he had some very red areas and really sort of different colours. And then on the right, it just struck me the colour combination was so similar with one of her first coloured sculptures, a sculpture with colour blue and dark red. Hepworth was really very involved with the foundry application of patinas. She often chose to change them herself afterwards. There were a fantastic collection of patina samples which were sent to Hepworth from her foundry, and they're upstairs in the galleries and the drawers. If you get a chance to look at them, they're really fantastic. And I think Hepworth actually did, as we all do in a way, think that the big bronzes should be quite robust and they should weather and they should be able to be handled. And she says of the public, "I'd like them to identify themselves with them or give them a pat," her sculptures, by the way. "I think every sculpture must be touched. It's part of the way you make it, and it's really our first sensibility." So this is all very well, but when it's amplified by several 100,000 visitors a year, and you get school groups who come like swarms towards you as you're trying to assess some sculptures, it becomes a real problem. As kids, they're interactive, they were meant to be. It's such a shame, but when it's literally hundreds of kids every year, the pattern has become eroded away, right down to polishing the bronze. You can see in the close-ups on the right, where the interior of that sculpture is completely eroded away, and it's become bright and polished rather than a green interior patina. So this is quite handy in a way, because for this project you can see some of the erosion of the bases here in particular, and you can see that these sculptures have been routinely waxed over years and years, and they've become really just one amorphous colour rather than a real contrast. But because of the actual damage, it meant we could really step in and restore these sculptures to how we think they should have originally been viewed. Again, we get a little note from Hepworth, who says, when she was looking for a place to originally house the family of man, she wrote that, "I feel very loath to drop the family of man through a hatch in a warehouse where they could not be seen or even weathered in the proper way that they should." But I think even Hepworth would have been surprised at the amount of weathering that these things could encounter over so many years. And these are some nice illustrations of the family of man as it's being constructed. So we have the aluminium armature, we have the application of the plaster, and then we have the finished sculptures. I'm going to get this completely wrong because I don't have my notes, but the Family Man, there are 9 units in 6 editions, and this is a photograph from my Marlborough catalogue again, because I love it, and it's so informative. These were installed outside the Morris Singer Foundry in Basingstoke, and there are only 2 full sets of the Family of Man, one at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, and the other one is at the Donald M. Kendall Sculpture Garden in Purchase, New York. And you can see from both these illustrations the contrast between the dark brown exteriors and then the green interiors. This is an illustration of the wax removal while we were treating these sculptures, and you can see the thick build-up on the I can't even do left and right now. Okay, this side is very black, and once the wax build-up is removed, you can really start to discover the rich texture from some of the original patternation. So it's really more a case of liver of sulphur brown, some greens and some golds. There is a real 3-dimensional kind of build-up there. This is Lindsay and I applying some of the patternation. So we did actually intervene again, and we repatinated the loss of the green areas. Sophie Bowness gave us the exact recipe for the patternation solution, which included calcium carbonate, which would give it opacity, and it really does work. And it's a cold patterner, so it can be applied outside and it can be applied on site, and it does react actually really, really well. It's amazing. It's almost like a paint. It's not a paint because it does actually react with the surface, but it was really quite magical. So this is why Hall of Fame now. We've done the Wall of Shame. This is the Hall of Fame. And we've got Ultimate Form before, where it's very obscured by the build-up of wax and a general treatment all over. And then after conservation, we can see the contrasts, and some of the gold edging is revealed. It's not been repolished, but it's been revealed once again. This is Ancestor 1. And actually, all the sculptures were moved on site so that the whole area could be re-landscaped. This is Ancestor 2. Parent 1. Hope I've got this right, Sophie. I get them mixed up so many times. There are so many of them, and every time you try and count them, you get them wrong. Here's a close-up of the gold edging on Parent 1, where it almost looks like it's been ground away. It's been patinated and then ground and polished. And Parent 2. And this is Bridegroom and Bride, Youth, and Young Girl. This is an overall shot, and then some lovely autumn day, just bright and lovely ones. And then thankfully there were 3 more just down the road. So this is the Family of Man, which were originally in Wakefield Town Centre, and now you can see them on the riverbank just outside the gallery. This is a postcard that I found on eBay that I just wanted to share because it's so hideous, and I'm not sure if they're trying to show the clock tower or all the sculptures here, but it's just a really interesting little shot. So, Family of Man in Wakefield, before and after. It looks like I photoshopped the after sky, doesn't it? But I haven't. That's just everything had improved greatly after the treatment. This is a close-up, a detail of how eroded and weathered they'd actually become. They'd not been waxed or maintained in many years, but even in this eroded state, where you can see black crust accumulation and you can see the water rivulet marks. Even in this state, some of the actual original patination is largely there, because once it's saturated with wax, which is what the foundry would have done anyway, they'd always wax a surface once it's been produced. You can see the half and half here of just the hot waxing. So I did replace the green areas of patination, but the dark areas are really just enhanced with wax and heat, and it just bring that richness again. It restores that richness. And there's a nice bird's eye view and the ladder again. And this is the pattern application, which we of course made tests prior to doing it. You use a stippled brush, which you put on, and then you use a brush to take it off, and use really, really, really tiny amounts of the solution. It doesn't take much. And here they are after, in lovely sunlight, which we've got today, which we don't often get in Wakefield, but we do. And this is the treatment of dual form in Leeds University. So these are the before photographs, and this is the pattern application, and this is the after shot, and some more after shots. And then this is dual form, which is at the Guildhall in St Ives, and these are the before shots. There are always birds around. When I'm doing a treatment, there are birds around, and I think there's more to them than just being birds. I'm sure somebody's looking down on me or trying to G me on or check out what I'm doing. And these are the after shots. And I'd just really like to add in a few now of the treatments that I've been able to do because of my relationship with the Hepworth Wakefield and the exhibitions that they've curated and created, and the Hepworths that have come to this area again, which weren't here before. So this is Galliard, and it was owned by the Wakefield Grammar School, the Girls' Grammar School, and it's made from sheet metal, and it had accumulated a lot of tarnish. And here's after. It's a bit bright, to be honest, but it will tarnish down. As it oxidises, it has a protective surface. I don't get to see them very often, even a few days after the treatment. As soon as it's finished, it gets ferried away. But this is an after shot. And this is Hieroglyph, which is in Leeds Art Gallery collection. This is a halfway through treatment where you can see the accumulation of dirt. And here you can see the colours from the stone have really come through after removal of the dirt. Our antiphon, here we go, it links up with Michael's now, but I think that's a better bush photo, don't you? Because actually, when we went to see it, I was with the estates team and we walked past it about 3 times, so we just couldn't see it. There was lots of ivy on the wall and it just blended in. I'm not sure if I've got a photo of the signature. No, I haven't. I was going to try and resolve your signature or make your mark thing, but I can't. This just shows the extent to things that can happen to the sculptures when they're, especially in vegetation, and they're near places where birds will sit. So there's a lot of bird lime. It's quite disfiguring. And this is antiphon during treatment. I was using the facilities at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. And finally, this is a sculpture which Ellen and I went to see recently, potentially for the next exhibition at the Hepworth. It's called Oval Form Tresion. It's at Abbott Hall Art Gallery in Kendal. And again, this one has been quite severely eroded over time. It's in a very exposed place, but we could still detect some of this white build-up in the crevices, which can be confusing because it really can look like a mistake because it's been so eroded. But looking at some of the photographs that Sophie Bowness sent me, we can see that there really is perhaps a treatment of the interior with this white substance, and it's not on the exterior in the same way. I think it's particularly visible on this sculpture. And of course, all the casts were treated very differently. We can't magically come up with a formula for one looking at several casts. They're all very different, and each one's very individual. This is my website, and it's me. But I think the last thing I'd like to reiterate, I'm sorry I've lost my notes, and I think I've left lots out, I'm afraid. I didn't lose my notes, they just didn't come up. But I would like to pose the question about ascending form, which sits outside the front of the gallery. It sits next to the Rebecca Warren, which is white and luminous. And I wonder what we should do to ascending form, which sits next to it. Would Barbara Hepworth be happy with its current state and it's developing a different pattern, as she does suggest in her letter, or would she prefer it to be repatinated? Just this week, I've got a new thing from eBay. I love eBay, it's brilliant, but you find little catalogues which you wouldn't normally get access to, with a great photo of ascending form, which you could come and have a look at maybe in a minute. which is very vivid and has that sort of rubbed down look. Something perhaps which is, you know, could be discussed. Thank you.